Franco wants to know, he says, I often hear liberals talk about how crooked Trump is. What are their claims?
Well, there's all kinds. And I hear that as well. And, all to which I could say, you know, um, well, there's two ways of answering that. One is they're trying to take Trump down analytically through what's called an individualist analysis. So we look at the person, we look at what shenanigans they've been involved in over the years and the like. But there's another way to analyze. And of course, look at Biden, look at Clinton. I mean, all these people, look at, Bill Gates, for heaven's sakes. We could go on and on with that stuff. And why did they get a pass? Because liberals look at them from a holistic analysis. They're not looking at them as individuals as much as they're looking at them as emblems of a movement. And as emblems of a movement, you could be personally very flawed. You can actually see the argument. You can, for the sake of argument, let's say everything you're concerned about is correct. There have been plenty of people historically that are personally very flawed, Martin Luther King being one of them, personally very, very flawed, but who emblemized a movement that transfigured those flaws into good, or into the to be used for the good. So I tend to try to push people in that direction and try to get them to recognize whatever you want to push about Trump in terms of possible illegalities or flaws or what have you. By the way, every single solitary investigation has turned up nothing, interestingly enough. I mean, even with the FBI lying about the guy, he still is coming out relatively squeaky clean. So I don't buy it. But even if we could even see them where they were, for the sake of argument, let's say this guy was as corrupt as some civil rights leader, for example. If he is a leader of a movement that is good, and especially if that movement is fighting back and pushing back a system that is infinitely more corrupt, right? There is no amount of corruption that Trump could be in that could even possibly compare to a day in the swamp. If that's the case, then that enables people who may recognize personal flaws to relativize those personal flaws to some kind of larger movement that he represents, that they support, and on the one side, and then they relativize those flaws to social concerns, political, economic concerns that they see as far, far more corrupt than any one person could embody. So those are relativizing dynamics that, even if you were to cede the argument, would still make Trump come out on top.
Well, speaking of swamp movements, I guess I'll call it that, Russell says Dr. Peterson indicated his plans to create consortium to offer alternative narratives to the Davos and climate religion crowd. Given the number of high-profile people missing from the Davos meeting, will this accelerate their decline and grip on our economies?
Yeah, I think so. I think Davos basically shot themselves in the foot. The moment they started allowing cameras in there and people started to actually share on Twitter without getting censored, unedited, what people from Davos were saying, what they were talking about. They were so forthright. They're so cocky that they just sank themselves. So there's a couple of things. One is Davos really, really became part of the international order only after the fall of the Soviet Union. So they were around since the 1970s, but they were very much part of a bounded order, just the democratic West, and their contribution was very, very limited to what they could do. Once the Soviet Union fell, you only had a single sole superpower, the United States, And so we moved from a bipolar world where there was two major powers, the States and Soviet Union, to a unipolar world where there was one single superpower that wanted to more or less create the world after our own image. This is Frank Fukuyama's thesis, the end of history thesis. You even had Charles Krauthammer was advocating this, what he called our unipolar moment, where basically we can remake all the nations after ourselves. We can turn all the nations into liberal democracies. We can push liberal values. We can have them all incorporated into our corporate capitalist system, and we can have them all incorporated into our institutions, the WTO, the WHO, the IMF, and the like. And it is in that context that the WEF absolutely flourished. I mean, we saw it with Sri Lanka. I mean, they brought their tentacles everywhere, into China. They did everywhere they could. Russia, to a certain extent, via the oligarchs, till Putin started pushing back a bit. They wanted to get their tentacles into Eastern Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, you name it. They were trying to get it everywhere. And the impetus was that the sole superpower, the United States, gave them the green line to do it, as well as Brussels as well. But Brussels is just subservient to the United States when all is said and done. That world is dead. That world is gone. And more and more scholars admitting that. We were admitting that first back in 2016. But only now are they catching up to it. So if you read articles really from last year about Davos, from the New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, they're all admitting that the world, the globalist unipolar world by which they flourished, is officially dead. Russia killed it officially with the invasion of Ukraine, and then all of the sanctions that were levied upon them were all exercising the punitive measures of this globalist society, this worldwide globalist mechanism. And Russia, far from being hurt by it, actually looked like they got stronger. And we find out because they have the Eurasian ties. They have the ties via the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They have BRICS. That's the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. It's actually about 60% of the world's population. Iran's coming into it. Pakistan's coming into it, and the like. So Indonesia, I found, is coming into BRICS. So they had these, again, like we talk about so much, they had these parallel institutions, parallel structures that they had been creating over the last 10 years. And nobody, it seems, in the West even knew it. They didn't even recognize Russia was becoming the first official civilization state. And then in the process, China, of course, has become a major economic and military power that can rival the United States. And so now we've gone from a bipolar world in the Cold War era to a unipolar world, and we might call it the WEF era. And now we are in a multipolar world where the WEF is being pushed back and shoved back and basically being told what to do by powers that be that over which it has very little influence. So their champagne parties are going to be coming to an end. I mean, they'll always be around because, they've got money and they've got nothing else to do. But increasingly all their plans are going to be landing on deaf ears, especially after what we saw happen in Sri Lanka.